When I climbed aboard in Boston, I guess I should have known. The passengers sat silently in equidistant rows. Some were staring straight ahead and others' eyes were closed. I was on a train of zombies and I was all alone. I moved along the aisles between the undead passengers. Asking for a seat, it was as if they hadn't heard. They sat and stared and glazed incomprehension till I passed. I was on a train of zombies and hope was fading fast. On a train of zombies, unaware but still upright, black boxes in their hands lit with otherworldly light. Some connected to their brains with wires that were white. I was on a train of zombies headed out into the night. I moved into the vestibule that says no riders here, waiting for the train to slow so I could disappear. But the conductor ripped the slider open and he smiled with savage glee, like Nicholson in The Shining, and he said, "Your ticket, please." On a train of zombies, unaware but still upright, black boxes in their hands lit with otherworldly light. Some connected to their brains with wires that were white. I was on a train of zombies headed out into the night. The train slowed down and sped up for no reason I could tell. Conductors at the door as if to guard the gates of hell. The light began to flicker, they went out and then came back. Commuter rail incompetence or the sign of the attack. The seconds passed like minutes and the minutes passed like days. In a silent rolling tomb I was accepting of my fate. Then it shuddered to a stop by my old rusty station sign. I headed for the exit and I never looked behind. On a train of zombies, unaware but still upright, black boxes in their hands lit with otherworldly light. Some connected to their brains with wires that were white. I was on a train of zombies, on a train of zombies, on a train of zombies headed out into the night.
I love that song. I do. And next June, we will again host Porch Fest on our front porch, and Randall will hopefully again have a spot on our porch, so watch for that. He does a wonderful job. So, now it's my job to wrap all of this stuff together. But fortunately, death and resurrection are the center of Christian faith. Who knew? And are really two sides of the same coin. The message of resurrection is essential to the joy and the hope that we share. But that message can become a platitude rather than the gospel if we ignore the death side of that coin, which we have become increasingly good at doing. The Christian calendar does its best to urge us to face the dragon of our demise. We have Ash Wednesday to specifically remember our mortality, followed by 6 full weeks of Lent, when we're invited to use the harsh desert of that realization to consider whether and how our lives might change in response to the fact that we are mortal beings. And those 6 weeks march us straight up the hill called Mount Calvary to bear witness to the brutal execution of an innocent man on Good Friday. But there were other such points on the calendar, too. Starting in the 8th century, the church set aside 3 days in fall to remember death's impact, honor the dead, and to integrate those losses both as individuals and as a community. The 3 days are October 31st, November 1st, and November 2nd, and came to be called together the season of All-Hallowtide. The center of the season is November 1st, All Saints' Day, or All Hallows. That was the day the church set aside to remember those who gave their lives in exceptional service to the church as a body, those canonized as saints and those martyred for their faith, a list of people that often overlapped. On the eve of All Hallows Eve, All Halloween, October 31st, there was a vigil to prepare hearts and minds to honor the sacrifices of the saints and the martyrs. And when it moved into English, that became abbreviated as Hallowevening, Halloween. The close of the season on November 2nd was not All Saints, but All Souls, the day that focused more on the very particular losses of friends and family, whether anyone outside of their own families had ever heard of them or not, whether they died after a long and fruitful life, or whether they died suddenly or tragically in their prime or as infants. All the others who had died were remembered on All Souls. Personally, I had never heard of All Souls Day growing up. I was a Baptist growing up. We didn't talk about that. Protestants tend to ignore the saints and martyrs. We tend to move the remembrance of all the souls onto All Saints' Day and have one day and call it quits. It was only because my father died at midnight between All Saints and All Souls, and our Catholic friends and relatives began talking about, oh my goodness, he died at midnight between All Saints and All Souls. And I'm like, what? What is this? I had to look it up to find out what All Souls Day was. And of course, the culture in the United States has just run away with All Hallows Eve, very much keeping the focus on death, but totally severing it from the religious significance of the days that followed. In the hands of our culture, Halloween became a time to use the symbols of death to frighten both ourselves and others. And in some quarters, unfortunately, to actually threaten death or other harm, the trick part of trick or treat, and sometimes to do emotional harm. But instead of reclaiming All Hallows Eve, many Protestant churches now, and Catholic churches too now, actually forbid their members from participating in Halloween activities. In a practice I discovered during my time serving the church, Methodist Church in Cross City, Florida, some churches set up a very different kind of scary house where they walk children through the scene of teenagers getting drunk and going out for a drive and then being killed in a car crash. And because that's apparently not traumatizing enough, the children are then brought into a scene where they see those dead teens being tormented by demons in hell because they were drinking and they were out on this date kind of thing, and then they died, and now this is what happened to them. And if the kids could still even speak after that room, then the pastor of the church came in to tell them how they could escape that fate and tell them about Jesus. Yeah, yeah, and they build it as Hope House. There was a Hope House literally set up across the street from the parsonage that I was living in there. It was all I could do not to go out and picket it. And it wasn't just particular to Cross City. I've seen it in other places across the country, and it's been one of the most disturbing abuses of Christian faith that I have witnessed. It is no wonder that a lot of people grow up and say, you know, church, maybe not. Maybe not. For the church, the purpose of facing death, whether it's Ash Wednesday or Good Friday or All Saints and All Souls, is not to learn either to fear it or to desire it and say, hey, let me be a martyr, I'll sign up for that. It's neither of those things. It's to learn to embrace it as a part of what it means to be human and to see it as the necessary precursor to resurrection. Life springs from death. It's built into every single year as winter gives way to spring, every time dead leaves turn into compost, which become rich soil, which give birth to life. And yet our society can't even bear the sight of dead leaves on our lawn, let alone really face the passing of our loved ones. That is a problem for the church. It's literally impossible to preach a message of resurrection to a society that ignores the painful reality of death. They are two sides of the same coin, which finally brings us around to this morning's crop of monsters, the skeletons, the zombies, the ghosts, and various other creatures from the crypt. We had a hall full of singing skeletons last night, and Randall gave us some poignant commentary in the Train of Zombies song, encouraging us to think about the ways we can be perhaps not dead, but not really living so much either. But whether we outsource our lives to our phones, or quite soon in myriad forms to artificial intelligence, we were outsourcing our dying long before technology presented us opportunities to outsource our living. We can't talk about resurrecting anything, not the church, not our society, not even ourselves, until we can find a way to actually live our lives and die our deaths with purpose, with honor, and with love. So how do we do that? As a former Baptist, one of the things I struggled with in seminary was figuring out what ritual was for. Ritual was one of the things many Protestant traditions threw out with the Catholic bathwater in the wake of the Protestant Reformation, and the Baptists were among them. So I grew up sort of giving a side eye to even the simplest of rituals. Responsive readings, public prayers. How could I pray the prayers of others, he thought? And how could my own prayers be said in public when Jesus says, when you pray, go into your closet and shut the door and don't let anybody see what you're doing? If we said or did something every single week, wouldn't it then lose its meaning? We sort of dreaded of doing something just by rote memory. I didn't get the whole thing. It was my public worship professor, Don Salyers, who's the father of Indigo girl Emily Salyers, by the way. And he was a fabulous, well, still is a fabulous musician in his own right. But he taught me the simple truth that the purpose of ritual is to provide a way to approach the unapproachable. With that simple concept, approach the unapproachable, well, yeah, we kind of need a way to do that. Everything fell into place. By embodying our fears, a monster story can be a ritual that provides a safe way to approach the fear that we have embodied in whatever monster we're encountering, and explore from a safe distance what it might take to neutralize it, or more frequently, to actually live with the threat. We talked last week about how the monsters live on the outskirts, in the liminal spaces, at the bottom of the sea, at the edge of civilization, in outer space, to sort of live with the concept that the monsters might be out there. There is pretty much nothing more unapproachable than death. And I've come to believe that the scary creatures of the crypt who ritually appear in what is now a full season of Halloween can open the door to our haunted hearts, to help us to approach the unapproachable. I think it's possible that we have so latched onto Halloween as a culture because of our need for exactly that, and our continued push to get actual death further and further away from us. One of the most terrifying things about various undead creatures we encounter in games, in movies, and haunted houses is that they can kill you, but you can't kill them because guess what? They're already dead. You can't kill the undead. And the inevitability of that, the monster that can't be stopped and from which we can't escape, is exactly the terror we are running from in our fears of death. We've been running from death for millennia, but we have never been so intentionally severed from the reality of dying as we are in the United States in the year of our Lord 2023. The body heads straight to the funeral home, where it's either sent off for cremation and not seen again until it's been reduced to ash, or is embalmed and made to look as lifelike as possible for a wake at a funeral home. Doesn't she look good? Remember the first time I went and I heard somebody say that? It's like, no, actually, she's looked better. Then it's buried in a metal or a hardwood casket, which is itself put into a metal or concrete grave liner, all of which is frequently lowered into a cement vault with an interior lining of plastic or steel with a water-resistant seal. I mean, tell me you're afraid of death without telling me you're afraid of death. That's the thing I'm terrified of. To actively prevent the dissolution of my body is for me a sacrilege. Let me be ash, let me be food, but let my body in death serve its God-ordained purpose to nourish the life-giving soil. Throw me into the sea, I don't care. Do not entomb me in a cement steel-lined box. I mean, God could move the stone. God's going to have a lot more to do the stone to get anybody out of one of those vaults. And don't get me started on how bad that general practice is for the earth itself. And the issues aren't just with the burial either. In many Christian quarters, the funeral is so focused on resurrection that it feels somehow lacking in faith to mention that someone has actually, died here. The purpose of ritual is to help us approach the unapproachable, not to help us avoid the unavoidable. And the rest of society is no help to us. If you're working, you get a week tops if a family member has died to get over the loss of a loved one. And if you're still struggling a month later, somebody's going to encourage you to get therapy because, why aren't you over it already? So what if you were married 65 years and now the house is empty? So what if it was a child who met a tragic end? So what if it was your only remaining friend in the world? The message from all corners is to deny, avoid, and distance ourselves from the reality of death and grief and grieving. And the expectation is that kind of distance will block its ability to affect us somehow for more than maybe a day or two. wrong on every single count. According to Investopedia, Halloween is the second biggest retail holiday in the United States, behind only Christmas. In 2021, as COVID still raged, we spent a record $10.1 billion on Halloween. No doubt there are many things that factor into that spending, but I bet you could draw matching charts for what we have spent on avoiding contact with actual death and the cost of those burials and all of the things we pay to the funeral homes and all of those things. I bet that chart of what we've spent avoiding death would match the chart of spending on Halloween to surround ourselves with the monsters of death that come door to door and wander our streets. If anybody wants to do that as a project, I would love to see it. But as we think about how we might put the zombies, ghosts, and skeletons of Halloween to work in bringing us to a healthier relationship with death, I think we can find some clues by looking at the traditions that Neil has described that grew up around the same All-Hallowtide season just south of our border in Mexico and other places across Latin America. As Neil has described, they give us 2 days where skeletons are the coin of the realm. You drink out of skull cups, you get little candied skulls that people give to each other. The dead are front and center. But as Neil described, unlike our Halloween, the Days of the Dead celebrations still have their central purpose, the memory of those who have died. We've pushed that off of Halloween to All Saints and All Souls. They have kept those things together while being able to both grieve, but also have moments of joy to remember. And the altars that are created in memory of loved ones filled with their favorite foods and drink, painting faces as skeletons, not to frighten, but to remember. We smear dust on our foreheads on Ash Wednesday to remember that dust we are and to dust we shall return. Those celebrating the Day of the Dead take the human skull we all have on the inside and just puts it on the outside. Guess what? Common humanity. The dead are remembered with stories about their lives. The spirit altars are built and filled with the flowers and food as a central focus to sit around and tell those stories. A good Christian celebration does those too. And when we have a celebration of life here, I often encourage families to bring those kinds of things to put on the altar to remember whatever they are, whatever represented their interests. And there was the day in Dover when I said, whatever it was, bring it. And I walked in to find our altar with a big Playboy bunny on it. Said, okay, whatever. But a difference in that and the Day of the Dead celebrations is that the food and drink are shared with the dead as well as the living. Oftentimes in Day of the Dead celebrations, there's a fun way to remember that we too are mortal by sharing making epigraphs like what you would have on your tombstone, but giving those to other people. Here's what I'd put on your tombstone. Here's what I would put on yours. And thinking about those kinds of things. Pastor I had when I was in college had everybody do that. What are only for yourself, what are the 3 words you would put on your tombstone? And he picked for himself, well, he tried. So there's There's a purpose in those kinds of fun rituals as well as the normal grieving and remembrance that we have. And what I want us to go home thinking about this morning is, what if we could ritually connect our creatures of the crypt to the fate that we all share, and to do so with honor and love and a bit of fun? If we could make death a bit more approachable through those rituals, maybe we wouldn't need to create so much death. Maybe we might find the courage to actually live our lives and not outsource it to a train of zombies. Maybe we could turn our swords into plowshares and our guns into candy skulls. What I learned about ritual in seminary is that when people complain about empty ritual, the problem is not the ritual, but the emptiness. The best rituals enact a drama that is infused with the fundamental issues of life. The more fraught and difficult the issue, the better suited it is for a ritual that gives us some symbolic way to approach the otherwise unapproachable. To be sure, the content of those rituals should be crafted with care. But just like a picture is worth 1,000 words, a well-crafted ritual can be worth 1,000 visits with a therapist or 1,000 sermons. We already have a tradition of remembering the dead that has been baked into church liturgy and practice for over 1,000 years. We have a culture that has turned the symbols of death into a multi-billion-dollar industry, celebrated with abundant rituals, as the creatures from the crypt and the heroes who defeat them wander our streets from house to house the night before. We have a tradition from our southern neighbors that remembers the ancient connection of the dead to the living and how they are still in one way or another among us, and the concrete ways that leaning into the fact of dying honors the dead even as it comforts the living. And we have a faith whose joyous message of resurrection can't be faithfully proclaimed unless somebody has actually died. It's resuscitation otherwise. You got to be dead to be resurrected. Is it possible that they could one day all go together again? Is it possible that a healthier approach to death might actually stop at least some of the killing? I think it's worth a try. Amen.